Okay, here we are down in the studio. This is not the best lighting, and I'm not sure what I can do about it. Let me see if there's a way to block the light from this window just a little bit. I'll be right back. Okay, that's better. Nothing like a cardboard box in the window to solve the problem. Okay, I don't have window coverings in here because I don't usually need them. The only time you really need them is when you're doing video. Anyway, rings. The way I learned to make rings was by creating a simple spiral, like this, of wire, and then cutting it with a saw. Now those spirals can be any size. They can be super teeny tiny, like that, which as you can see is super teeny tiny. The inside diameter on that is about 1/16 of an inch, and it's made with twisted wire. And it's used for creating decorative rings that you solder onto things. So that would grow up to be things like that. Yeah, itty bitty teeny tiny rings that you solder onto jewelry. So you can make them teeny tiny like that. You can make them sort of middle size like that. This is the size I'm using in the house right now for making those chains. And you can make them giant like this, which actually becomes a brooch. But it's the same process. First I'm going to show you how to cut it, and then I'm going to show you how I wrap it. I know that's backwards, but it's okay. It has to do with where I'm working in the studio. So, originally, I've got a little twist of wire like this, and I would have put it down on a bench pin. Usually the bench pins I use, I was looking for my other one. I have no idea where it's disappeared to. I have a metal one, and I have this wood one. Should be another wood one here somewhere, and I'm just not seeing it, of course. I haven't used it recently, but I'll use this. Doesn't matter. I would hold it with my fingers like that, and I would take a saw. Now this is a jeweler's saw, so it has a very thin blade, so you're not removing much metal. And I would saw until I got all the way through the piece of twisted wire. And then, usually, the ring will fall onto the blade, like that. Now, when you're doing something like this, you need to have a way to catch these, because they will scoot all over the place, and you'll find them everywhere except where you want them. This ring, having now been separated from its spiral, wants to get stuck on my blade, and that's not uncommon. So I would normally take, I don't have any flat bladed pair of pliers. Half of the times they'll stick on the blade, and the other half of the time they'll fall on the floor. But if you simply twist the link the same way as I would inside the house for doing stuff, I now have an open link that I can use. Now, obviously, this is a tedious process. The way I originally learned to do this was you took a dowel, something like this, and you drill a hole in it to keep the end of the wire from scooting off into the distance. And then you literally just by hand twist the wire around the dowel. And now you put them as close as you can because you want it to stack up just tight like that. And it works. And then when you go to cut it, you actually cut it. You cut off the loose piece, so you've got a spiral here. Let me slide this on here as if it was a spiral that I made on here. Or is it going to? No, it's too. It's a little too. This is a little too big for this. That would be too easy. Let me see if I can find one I can demo with. I have all sizes of dowels, except for probably the one I need. Because this was probably twisted on a metal dowel. There we go. I found one that'll work. Okay. So if I had just twisted this wire on a dowel, that's what it would look like. It would be sitting there on the dowel, all ready to be cut. I would have clipped off the extra wire, because these normally I buy on big rolls, and having something that looks like this is not uncommon. So you don't want that dangling off and getting in the way. So you cut it off, and now you've got this whole line of rings ready to be cut. The dowel becomes sacrificial. It can be used several times usually before it gets too yucky. Part of how fast it will get yucky is how careful you are when you're cutting. So, remove some of the stuff. I've got 16 projects at least underway right now. If I'm using a really soft metal like copper, for instance, which is what I learned to do, and I actually encourage people to learn on something super cheap like a copper. It's easy to wrap with your bare fingers or with a pair of garden gloves on, and it's cheap. So you're not thinking, oh gosh, I just spent $20 on that wire and now I've wasted it all. We were taught, especially with something like super soft like copper, to wrap this whole thing in painter's tape, the blue stuff, you know, that you have that doesn't leave marks on things. Something like this. This is a piece. I don't think this has got any stickum left on it, but I would literally just spiral this on here like this. And what that does is it protects the wire that's there. It also helps slightly to control the tendency of the links to go flying across the room. I highly recommend, despite that fact that it will help, that you put something like an apron or a towel underneath it, because they're going to spring away anyway, to some extent. Then push the dowel so that it's just inside the coil and start sawing. Now this coil is actually a reject. It was a coil that failed when I was cutting it on a different machine. So it's cutting faster than it would if I just had an uncut coil. But you'll see as I do it, some of the rings want to fall on here, some of the rings will fall off. If I keep pushing that dowel inside, the rings will have more of a tendency to fall off, but they will also, you won't cut as much of the dowel. So now this is sort of stuck a little bit inside the tape. I could drop that in my lap and keep pushing like that. Be careful of your fingers when you do this. There is a high probability at some point you will cut yourself because you won't be paying attention. And if you think, I mean, the word ouch comes to mind. The saw will do a great job on your fingers. Now, as you go back, you can peel this tape off so you can see what you're doing better. Just like that, and keep going. And this works. This is how I learned to cut rings a bazillion years ago. I was taught to do them this way by somebody that I was learning with, and what she wanted me and one of the other apprentices to do was to create a bazillion rings for her to teach a class. So she needed these rings not just cut like this, but actually soldered, because she was making another type of chain that requires soldered rings called loop and loop. And I have not done any loop and loop recently because it simply takes more time than I've had. It's a really lovely technique. It was heavily used by the Romans. The Vikings did not use it as commonly as the Romans did because they didn't solder very much, to be honest. Most of the Vikings didn't have the capabilities to solder. They could cast beautifully. They could do all kinds of other things, but they could not solder, because soldering is a different technology. Now, what you may have noticed is this is a little tedious. I have put in some effort, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have a total of 6 rings here, which are very nicely cut. You know, the ends are nice and square and everything, the same way I like to have them. But I'm talking about cutting, you know, like a half a pound of rings or a pound of rings. You're not going to do it anytime soon with this. I have done a lot of rings this way. I had my first assignment as an apprentice was to cut and manufacture 200 or 300, depending on how many I could get done. I think I did 3. Closed, as in soldered closed, links for my person that I was apprenticed to. And I did it, and I learned a lot, because when you do that kind of repetition, you get better and better and better at it. I got faster at cutting. I learned not to break blades on my saw. I learned how to not make jagged edges on my rings. I learned how to solder more efficiently. All in all, a learning experience. I mean, it's the kind of thing you want to listen to tunes while you're doing, because it's a little tedious. But that's the way you do learn, is by repeating and repeating and repeating. You can't expect to take any new skill and instantly be good at it. Does it ever happen? Yeah, it does. It does. Sometimes you just find you've got a tremendous knack for something, but sometimes you find you don't. So obviously this is a little on the tedious side. What do I do today? I'll show you. Gotta move over to a different location.